Thanks ever so much, Sarah, and for the teasing, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, Luke, when we think about Adam Smith thought that justice sat at the heart of any effective social system. You know, he wrote 2 books. His first one was A Theory of Moral Sentiments, and it's about morality and where that sits in human society. In that book, he wrote, if justice is removed, the immense fabric of human society must in a moment crumble into atoms. Of course, his second book is the more famous one, The Wealth of Nations. And I believe that sense of justice is also central to what Smith was advocating there. And that modern evidence helps us understand that and why it is that is. And I think that some of the things I'll say will dovetail with what John Allardyce has said, and I hope with what the great John Kay will be saying after I have spoken. So the wealth of nations, the argument begins for the wealth of nations. It's the very first sentence, is about productivity, the productive powers of labour, where he says they seem to have been made greater by the effect of the division of labour. So specialisation is what gives you greater productivity. And if you want specialisation, then that's limited by the size of the market, because if people specialise, you need to have a big market. And big markets work only when people are able to trade. Thus, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from regard to their own self-interest. Thus, Smith's argument for free trade, open market, and acceptance that self-interest can deliver positive results. And look, these are really important observations. And if you look back over 250 years, specialisation, expansion of markets have hugely increased our productivity. Next time you see a plane fly across the sky, think of the specialisation that went into every element of that plane. But what we haven't discussed enough is the degree to which a common sense of justice is needed to underpin the trade that's essential for productivity and prosperity. And I believe that is a blind spot, a huge blind spot that is now ingrained into the core thinking that we have in Economics 101. Look, I don't know if any of you have ever studied economics, but I remember my class, and I still do this with my students who have studied economics, where I asked them to consider 2 islands, they've never met each other, and then all of a sudden they're able to trade. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And of course economics tells us that's a wonderful thing, because the country that was making oranges can sell oranges to the country that made wheat. But history tells you a really different story, doesn't it? Try explaining why it was such a great idea for the Australian Aboriginals when the Europeans arrived, or for the people who lived in North America. Try talking to Chinese historians about the unequal treaties. All will tell you that contact and trade with the expanding European explorers and merchants was really problematic, indeed in some cases utterly catastrophic, because the terms of trade were unethical and were unjust. And no one taught you that in economics. The common assumption in much of economics is that fair trade simply emerges through the action of some invisible hand, and that just does not reflect the real world. Of course, Smith recognized selfishness, but it was only as one human characteristic. The assumption of humans being exclusively self-interested, by the way, it's an assumption in modern economics that is so ubiquitous, we've even got a description for it, Homo economicus, the self-interested person. It's often attributed to Smith, but I think it would have been an anathema to him. Indeed, the opening of the Theory of Moral Sentiments is this, the first sentence of that book: however selfish man may be supposed to be, there are evidently some principles in his nature that interest him in the fortune of others, and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. Smith understood we are social animals, ethical creatures, we're not Homo economicus, and to assume that flies in the face of the evidence. No anthropologist anywhere in the world has ever found a society which is characterized by that sort of self-interest. So, what do we know about justice and fairness in economic systems and what works? I think the answer to that is far too little. But I want to do just an experiment with you, if I may, for a little bit of different sort of audience participation. It's called the ultimatum game. Some of you may have come across this before. And I want to consider that you're in a team of two people. Your partner has just been given £100. And your partner needs to decide how much of that £100 they will give to you. Your only power is to say, I don't want any money, give the £100 back and we'll both get nothing. To understand the game, how it all works. If the partner was to offer you £50, how many of you would accept that deal and allow them to keep the other £50? And see, hands up. I think we've got most people that put their hands up, yeah? If they were to offer you £1, how many of you would accept? There's one. Can I ask you, did you study economics at any stage? No, you didn't. That's quite interesting, because people who study economics tend to... But just to be clear, Homo economicus, yeah, would accept £1, because they're better off. It's just not what happens in the real world. What happens in the real world is that we have a sense of justice, a sense of how it is that trade should take place. By the way, it's really, really ingrained. It's not just humans that feel this. Chimpanzees can be shown to feel this sort of stuff as well. It's really clear. So let's be very explicit on this. Justice and hence ethics are fundamental to any economic system. Society may subsist, says Adam Smith, though not in the most comfortable state, without beneficence, by which he means a moral duty to act for others. But the prevalence of injustice must ultimately destroy it. So studying economics without studying what is just trade is at best partial, at worst vacuous, and indeed dangerous. And if we train people to implement economic policies based on that, we are courting dystopia. But it then opens up a really new area of inquiry. What sort of justice should underpin trade between individuals and organisations and countries? What forms of justice are the ones that would promote our economic well-being? I think these are the questions, equally as much as the microeconomics 101 questions that arise from reading Adam Smith. And these questions are discussed by institutional and development economics and by economic historians, but they're not in the microeconomic curriculum, the first thing that you're taught. And I'd like to just push this argument a little bit further with some modern evidence that actually I think John Kay introduced me to, which I find absolutely fascinating. And it's a study not by an economist, it's actually by an anthropologist called Joe Hendrich. And he wanted to compare the results of the ultimatum game, if it was played by people in Los Angeles, compared to what would happen if it was played by some pretty isolated hunter-gatherer people that he'd been studying in the Amazon, the Machijenka. Who do you think gave away more? The people from LA or the Machijenka in the Amazon? Who would think the people from LA gave away more? Yeah, I've got a few hands. Who would think the Machijenka? I've got a sea of hands. Actually, the people from Los Angeles were the people who gave away more. And here's Hendrich's suggestion. It's just a suggestion. It's not proven. But he's saying it is our sense of justice, of our sense of responsibility to one another that has underpinned our trade and made it successful, and that the Machijenka lack the institutions for solving large-scale cooperative dilemmas, such as how it is that we trade and trade globally in the modern world. And he's repeated that experiment quite broadly, and he claims that he's found an inverse relationship between individual self-interest and prosperity. On a proper reading of Smith, that conclusion might not surprise us. But sadly, many have misinterpreted his work to suggest that a society characterized by Homo economicus is the one we should be moving towards. That misrepresentation means that we build our thinking on a false assumption and we fail to consider the critical elements of ethics and justice necessary for trade and the scale and the specialization of labor that is central to Adam Smith's view. In fact, it is our common sense of justice, of fairness, that allows the trade to take place. And so I'd like to just finish with a wee bit of a sermon, like John Allardyce, my father was a minister. I think this is a call for people that are researching economics. We need to take off the blinkers on this. This is not describing the real world if we are assuming Homo economicus in markets. We need to be asking those as well who are studying anthropology and history and sociology and philosophy and politics and ethics to help us understand what are the characteristics that help us build a prosperous world. Where we're practitioners, we need to understand the obvious, that the cultures of the organization that we're part of are easily as important in the way that people behave as are the financial incentives that are given. And for those that are developing economic policies, please treat what you read in the textbooks with the greatest of caution. They don't represent the views of Adam Smith. They don't represent the world that you seek to represent and you seek to serve. And if you create a world built on Homo economicus, it will be a dystopia. But who's going to demand this happens? Well, if it's not us, the Global Ethical Finance Initiative, then who is it? And if not now, when? Thank you.